This is so beautiful, just the essential notes. And then and I love listening for all this movement by step. This piece is just so delicious. Well, hi there, it's me, Penny. Welcome back to my practice room, and thanks for joining me for this tutorial devoted to some early intermediate level repertoire. We're looking at the Minuet in D minor, and I have as my score today the Level 4 book from the Royal Conservatory of Music's Celebration series. So I thought this would be a good piece because perhaps there are viewers out there, maybe even yourself, who are looking to begin playing Bach's music. And this is a lovely little piece, level 4, as I say. So, you know, a few years of study under your belt, and this piece would be totally appropriate for you. It's just 1 page in length. It's incredibly beautiful, and I want to show you some of the things that I'm listening for, that I've noticed about the piece. I want to take some things apart. I want to show you how I practice, not just practicing as a professional, but also some steps that I would take if I were practicing this as an early intermediate level player myself. So I'll do some counting out loud as well. And for those of you who are more advanced, you can just skip over that part. You don't need to hear me counting. But these are all essential practice techniques, and I want to include as many as I can. And this piece being just 1 page in length makes it absolutely perfect to cover a lot of ground. So let's just get right in here. Where do I begin? My goodness. Let's start. You heard a little bit of the piece. Maybe I'll just play a smidgen of it to get it in your ear. So it's a minuet. It's in 3/4 time in the key of D minor. The saddest of all keys, as I had a teacher once remark. And this piece, I've noticed, it has a lot of undulating kind of contour to the melodic line. And much of that, I think, comes by way of the stepwise motion that occurs largely in the right hand by way of eighth notes. So these things. In measure 1, measure 6, left hand, measure 8, right hand, measure 9, 2 bars later, and then left hand, right hand gets it. This kind of undulating, as I say, melodic lines are kind of the main essential ingredient that I'm listening for. And so that is impacting the quality of the tone that I want to receive or conjure up out of the instrument. Contour, like Art Nouveau, you know, these very plant-like, if you imagine vines growing up the side of a brick house, maybe, you know, the vines, they're curly, they're not just a straight stem, they're curly and winding, and that's what I'm hearing in these eighth note gestures moving by step. Sometimes they go up, sometimes they go down, and that's part of the fun of it as well. And in the left hand too, it's moving in the same fashion, but in a more augmented style, longer note values, such as the beginning. And then more stepwise in the left hand, measure 5. And we already heard some of the other places that the left hand has. So that is the main idea that I want to convey. Now, if I were beginning this piece when I was, I don't know, let's say 10 or 11 years old or so, would I be listening for these things? Would I be noticing contour? No, for goodness sake, I would just be noticing the note names, A, F, E, D, C sharp, D. I'd be playing it primarily in a mezzo forte level. I never had trouble getting my hands nice and together, so that part would have been fine. There wouldn't have been much of a dance element. This is a minuet, it's a dance. But would I have been doing much of that as a 10-year-old me? No, for goodness sake. I'd have played it probably something like this. And I'd have been rocking out and thinking I was just a Liberace, right? That was fun for me to, actually, I did not learn this piece back in the day, but similar pieces like this, that's how I would have played them. And that would have been well received at festivals. And, my teacher would have coaxed out some more sensitivity of touch and a little bit of ritardando at some of the ends of the sections, this kind of thing. But in the main, that's what the playing would have been like. And I have had a lot of training since then, and so have come to listen much more critically, and having many personal experiences along the way, emotional, psychological, whatever you want to say. A lot of life has happened since then, and that has impacted my approach. We're always learning, and I think the more that we learn, the more we realize that we don't know much at all. And that's kind of lights a fire under your bum. Hopefully, anyway. You may not be at a point where you can even play it, in a sturdy fashion, as some of the examiners will write on their reports. And maybe you're trying to get just to that point as a starting point. So I want to throw out some ideas and show you how I would practice to get it to a basic level, and then to take it a little bit more beyond. But all in all, with the idea that we want to express something through the music. We don't, for me anyway, everyone is different. No two performances will give people the same level of enjoyment. I put out videos and I get lots of comments. I get lots of generous, warm compliments. And then I get some very harsh words sometimes, and it's the same performance. So, you have to play in a way that pleases yourself. But I think we can only do that when we know how to listen, and literally listening deeply with X-ray ears, as Abram Chasins used to say. So, getting into this, let's go to the starting blocks and pretend that we are level 4 students. Whether you're 70 years old resuming your lessons, or you're 8 years old and you just want to get this piece learned so you can go play hockey. Let's take it from that kind of level. If I'm just beginning this piece as a late beginner, early intermediate, I might have some challenges rhythmically speaking. I might have challenges in terms of note reading. And chances are I'm not listening a whole lot to the quality of my sound. So some things that you can do to help with that, first thing, the rhythm, would be to write in the beats onto the page in pencil, always in pencil. I'm going to show you on the screen here. Now you're going to chuckle because there's a whole lot of color on the page here. But we'll just look at one thing at a time because there's a lot there, obviously. But I'm going to point with my pencil here. this piece is in 3/4, so I've written in 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. For the whole piece, I've done this, and the little plus signs are the and. So 3 beats per bar, 1 and is 1 full bar, 1 full beat, 2 and is our beat 2, 3 and is our third beat. We have mostly eighth notes, quarter notes, some half notes, and just a couple of 16th notes in the right hand, measure 10 and measure 12. And so you'll notice there, and throughout all of this, when I'm marking in the counts, I'm doing it right under the proper note. So, this and here in measure 10 is literally right under the G, that eighth note, because that's where it is in the beat. These 2 16ths are worth the first eighth. This eighth is worth the second eighth, and together they make 1 and. Same thing with my 2 here. It's right under the beginning of beat 2. Sometimes I see students and they'll go to write in the numbers, and they'll have like here in measure 11, I got my 1 right under the downbeat. But some students will write their 1 off to the side, and then the and over here, and they got the right numbers written down, but they're not lined up accordingly. And especially if you're a visual learner, that can be it can be a real help. If you're a visual learner and you're having rhythmic troubles, rhythmic coordination issues, write your beats in. I mean, once you get more comfortable, don't bother, maybe here and there write it in. I still write it in sometimes if it's a really difficult rhythm with a lot of 30-second notes, and double dots, I have to write it in. But not for the whole piece, of course. It's like with fingering. So, yeah, and then, okay, once you've got those beats written in, count out loud. Play, or if you haven't learned the notes yet, clap the rhythm, right? So let's do that. And again, if this is like too rudimentary for you, just skip ahead. I'm going to do this for the right hand, right? So clapping the rhythm and counting out loud. Give yourself a whole beat, a whole bar rather, before you start, so you can establish the pulse. 1 and 2, here we go. 1 and 2 and 3 and 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 1, 2 and 3 and 1 and 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 2, 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3 and I'm not going to do the left hand because you get the idea. When you're doing that, be sure not to evacuate ship early on long notes. On any of those long notes, like the dotted half notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and. We want to hear the and of 3. That's part of the bar, right? So much of that clapping and counting out loud is very essential. And you do the same for the left hand, of course. So once we've got the rhythms reasonably well learned, we look at the notes, and you can write some note names in as you go. That is totally fine. I wouldn't recommend writing in every single note name, just here and there as a little gentle reminder if need be. Sometimes when I have pieces with a lot of ledger lines, I need to A, C, E, G, I need to write it in. But assuming you've got your note names learned and you're looking to put this or begin coordinating it hands together, I'm going to do some hand separate practice as well. Don't get me wrong. That's essential. We're going to do that. But I just, in conjunction with rhythmic work, counting out loud, one thing that you can do, if you're having trouble playing hands together, even at a slow speed, and having the right rhythm, take your hands off the keyboard and just tap both hands on either your lap. I'm going to tap them up here on the top of the piano. Again, counting out loud. And what's not a bad idea is to add to that, putting on your metronome. Let's put this somewhere around 92 for the quarter note, right? Still counting out loud. There's so much value. Students hate counting out loud. They truly do. I used to actually like it. I don't know why. Who knows? I'm not going to speculate. I have an idea, but anyhow, counting out loud, so essential for pianists when they're learning to practice. Right? So here we go. 1, 2, 3. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2, 3 and 1 and 2 and 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 3 and 1, 2 and 3. Now that's a little fast. Maybe you take it slower, of course. But that step, include that in your practice session if you are a student at this level 4-ish. The other thing too, with clapping, be sure that you're clapping with your fingers together and not like wobbly, so that the clapping or the tapping is kind of like feeble and wishy-washy, nice fingers together, cupped hand, kind of curved like that, and tap with a strong, right, and not, these things matter. You may laugh, you may think, oh, that doesn't matter. All that matters is when I push the key down, right? But no, it's part of the package of internalizing in your body every little contour and detail of the touch, tone, and rhythm of the music. So clapping with a firm sound, counting out loud clearly at whatever tempo feels good to you. This is all important stuff. All right? And then you begin putting hands together in that fashion. And I think it's always a good idea when you're learning a new piece to take it in chunks. If you're learning a new Schubert sonata and the first movement alone is almost a half hour long. I remember I played the B-flat major D960 for a recital at Eastman, and that thing, especially if you take the repeats, it's like 45, 50 minutes long, the whole sonata, right? This is one-page piece. Obviously, it's a binary section, a binary form, 2 parts, A and B. The first 8 bars is our A section, and then the last 8 bars is our B section. So if this is a new piece for you, take those first 8 bars, the A section, and just focus on that. Maybe a few weeks hands separate. And then once you've got the rhythm internalized and comfortable with your counting out loud and the clapping, then go to the piano, play slowly with the counting out loud. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and hearing the ands of each beat. And 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3. You can take the second ending. I'm taking the first for now. 1 and 2 and 3 and 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 1 and 2 come off when you've received or you've given the entire duration of the beat. Now, let's do that with the left hand. You're probably wondering, well, how do I get to that stage without fingering? I'm going to show you fingering very shortly, both a sort of a raw basic fingering that I probably would have used when I was at this level. And then I'm also going to show you a fingering that I would use now, which incorporates a lot of finger substitution. So you'll see that in just a second. This is not a difficult piece to finger, although there's a couple spots perhaps. If you take the repeats, then if you're you're a higher level player, it's likely that you would add some ornaments the second time around. And I have added some, and I'll show you those a little bit later. But if you're just, level 4, don't worry about adding ornaments for now. But the left hand, let's do that by itself, counting out loud. 1 and 2 and 3 and 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 1. Oh, sorry, I was taking the first ending. Second ending, 1, 2, and 3. 1 and 2 and 3 and 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 1, 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. Okay, so basic level steps for the late beginner, early intermediate student. Now, before we get into anything else, let's just take a little romp through the piece itself in terms of its context and the collection from which it appears. This piece, the Minuet in D minor, you may have noticed in the sheet music already that it says attributed to J.S. Bach. And also, where we normally have a BWV number, this one says ANH period, and the number's 132. The ANH stands for Anhung, which I believe refers to appendix. And I wrote down here, any works that have the Anhung, or ANH, after them, are works whose authenticity has not been fully secured or determined. So that's why it says this piece has been attributed to Bach. I think it. The chances are it is. It certainly feels like Bach as a player. But anyhow, I just wanted to put that out there. It's a beautiful piece nonetheless, and it's certainly from this period and very evocative of the dance suites, of which Bach wrote many. Now, this piece comes from the notebook for Anna Magdalena Bach, and she was Bach's wife. And there are 2 little books, notebooks. I'll show you a picture of the manuscript on the screen here. You can look at them through the IMSLP website, and they're beautiful. They have this green cover. The second one has a little ribbon on it. Oh, they're so precious looking. And you can scroll through the whole book online. It's amazing what we have access to for free. Assuming you have internet, it's free. It's amazing. And so there are, I'm not a musicologist, but this, in a nutshell, there are 2 of these little books, which contain a great assortment of keyboard works. The first one, I have to check my notes here. The first one is from 1722. The second book, from which this piece comes, is from 1725. Now, this, the second book, has early versions of 2 of the partitas, partita number 2 and number 6. As well, it contains other teaching material, including the famous C major prelude from Volume 1 of Well-Tempered Clavier. Right? So many of these pieces appeared in the notebook for Anna Magdalena Bach. The aria from the Goldberg Variations. Right? This piece appears also in this little notebook for Anna Magdalena Bach. It's amazing, right? And of course, that later became its own piece, along with the other variations that make up that monumental one. That's one of the most difficult keyboard works, certainly one, if not the most very difficult variation set, one of the most. And it contains also some pieces by some other composers as well. Couperin is one of them. I have my Maurice Hinson Guide to the Pianist's Repertoire here. This is a second revised and enlarged edition. Probably I don't know what edition it's in now. It's probably changed a lot since it came out in 1994. This edition, anyway, is from 94, and this is one of the books that we were required to get as piano majors at Eastman School of Music, and once in a while I pull it out. It's a good reference. And it says here about this little notebook for Anna Magdalena Bach, Book 2, from which this piece comes. It says, smaller works by Bach and other composers such as Couperin, C.P.E. Bach, that's Bach's son, Stürzel, with a question mark, and Böhm. Some of the small dance movements so popular with many piano teachers are not by Bach. Bach himself started this collection with the 2 large partitas as a form of dedication, and with its this book, this collection of pieces, with its patchwork of grave and gay spontaneity and profound art, opens a door for us to the Bach's daily life. That's nice. It's a nice thought. I mean, this is a musical family, right? I mean, what does a husband give his wife nowadays? Maybe flowers, maybe chocolates, take her out for dinner, but a whole book of didactic teaching works and many intensely difficult and brilliantly structured works. That says something about the family. They were all very musical. So I wanted to give that background. Book 1, the first of these little notebooks, which is from 1722, that one also has some well-known didactic, easier repertoire. It contains the first 5 French suites, so that's worth noting, and some other things as well. So, I assume that this is by Bach, but we're not entirely sure, so we say it's attributed to Bach. Okay, now getting back to the piece itself as a pianist, this is all assuming you're playing on the piano. I have next to no experience playing on a harpsichord. So these comments are designed for the pianist. They'll work if you have an electronic keyboard, but certainly if that is your instrument, and I get it, sometimes that's all we can afford or that's all we have room for, whatever the reason may be, they are portable, those instruments, so they are handy. You can plug headphones in too. If you live in an apartment, that can be very helpful. But certainly if you have an opportunity to play a piano, practice somewhere, like a church even. My teacher, Constance Keene, used to say that churches were wonderful places, especially if you were on the road or traveling somewhere. They could let you in to practice, right? So, try to get access to a piano if you can. But let's get back to this piece. I want to talk about the fingering. Now, I'm going to show you on the screen here 2 pages. And on the left, that there's a whole lot less markings on that page. The markings in orange indicate the fingering that I think I probably would have used back in the day when I was level 4. Of course, I can't be sure of that, but a basic fingering that works, but is it really full of choices of fingering that allow you to exploit that beautiful contour of this melodic line of this to get a beautiful rich tone? No, those orange numbers, they're just plain old fingering. So if you're just starting out in your level 4 or whatever, try those orange fingerings. If you're a little bit more advanced, or you're just a brave level 4 student, then take a look at the numbers in green. Now, where you see green, those are fingers that I would use instead of the ones in orange. Most of it is the same, but you see that places where there is green, these usually are instances where I'm doing a finger substitution, and that is just a number followed by a slash and another number. So in the beginning, if I were a level 4 student, I would put my thumb down on there. Boom, I played it, teacher. Yay, let me go home now. But me now, the fingering that I would use there, instead of putting my thumb down on the first note, which creates kind of a bump, like a thud, because the thumb is such a strange finger, right? It's fat, it's short, it's on the side of the hand, and we're using the side of that finger as opposed to the fleshy, pillowy pad of the finger like we do with the others, right? So it's very hard to get a nice, rich singing tone, and certainly that's what we want at the beginning of the piece. So I take 2 and I do a quick substitution to 1. 2, switch to 1, right? Because you need 1 on it, let's face it, to get up to the F and etc. Good fingering is fingering that accounts for what's coming up in a passage, that allows you to prepare for what's to come, that allows you to minimize the use of weak fingers on notes that you want to give great expression to. Good fingering is fingering that allows constant movement of the hand. So many times I see a student play, kind of like this. Get to the end of the piece, and you can see it, whether it's an adult or a child, you can see it. They play the note, and the hand basically just goes into sleepy mode. It just sinks, and it doesn't move, and therefore the tone it just fizzles out, right? But if I use these green numbers, as I've shown you here, the substitutions, it allows me to prepare my hand for a more cushioned tone. And in my last tutorial, I was talking about students who play with harshness and how that kind of harsh sound that hurts the ears, hurts my ears anyway, is caused by throwing the arm from the elbow with the upper arm tight against the upper body and the wrist basically locked. Just put out the candle, put out the fire completely. The fire of beautiful music has been extinguished when we do this. I'm playing with my upper arms very tight against the upper body. I'm throwing from the elbow, And basically from the elbow to the tip of the finger, or at least to the knuckles, is all one fixed straight line. I don't think I certainly don't want that. I had some excellent training and some teachers who showed me how to incorporate rotation of the wrist and arm, release of the upper arm away from the body, all of these things to help create a beautiful tone, beautiful touch and tone. Touch is a pianist's most distinguishing trait. Osip Gabrilowitsch, the great Russian-American pianist, talked about that. I made a little short about that as well. And it takes many years to cultivate a sensitive touch. But you can be doing everything in the world with your fingers, but unless your ears are engaged and listening critically, that beautiful touch and tone will evade you. So always listen. So instead of throwing with that orange fingering, those two things in conjunction, I want to release my upper arm away from the body a little bit, have some flexibility in my wrist, utilize those green fingerings, i.e. the finger substitutions, and we get something like this. This kind of thing. More sensitive, expressive playing. So you can take a screenshot if you like of those fingerings and try them out, and hopefully there's something that's useful there. I don't recommend copying this fingering because everyone has a different sized shape of hand. That's another thing to take into consideration. But it doesn't hurt to get someone else's fingering from time to time. Okay, so let's see. I can put that book away. We've talked about fingering, a little bit about tone. Let's go back to the tone quality. So at the beginning of the video, I was talking about this movement by step. Right hand, measure 1, left hand, first 2 bars. If you see the sheet music, I'll put it back on the screen. These places, this stepwise motion, usually it's 4 notes, sometimes it's 5, and then in the case of this, we got 7. But these I've indicated with the blue stems, big long blue stems. You can see them, right? Hopefully that's clear throughout the piece. Left, right, there's a lot of it, right? So those I'm trying to listen for and give good contour, like those vines clinging to the side of a wall. They're gnarly, right? I live in Niagara region here in Ontario, Canada. There's a lot of wineries and vineyards, and when you drive out in the more rural areas where the orchards and wineries are, you can see all these grape trees and different fruit trees and the gnarly little trunks and branches and, you know, that kind of thing. That's the vibe that I'm going for, trying to create in sound by way of these 8th notes. And this opening note going up a minor 6th, what I'm thinking of is not just 2 keys on the piano being pushed like that, but I'm trying to create like sinew between them. Not ultra legato necessarily, and certainly not much pedal at all. In fact, you could get through this piece very nicely with no pedal, just teeny touches, I suppose, here and there. But trying to imagine that invisible muscular kind of tendons between your notes, and the longer the note value, the longer the note values, the thicker this imaginary muscular tendons. I don't know what other analogies are like gooey glue kind of, but that's glue is not the right analogy. Muscular tendons. So the left hand in the opening, which is half notes and quarters, sort of imagining that there's thicker muscular tendons between those notes, and then the shorter note values, like the eighth notes, and then the little 16th notes later on, those are of a sort of a thinner, less kind of a muscular tendon, and also lighter in the key. The longer the note value, the more depth of tone it needs. Doesn't mean louder necessarily, but more depth of tone from your upper body, from your upper arm and your back muscles, going deeper into the key. And then the shorter the note value, like these little eighth notes, 16th notes, lighter in the key, right? To create texture. If I play it all the same, it's very black and white. And so are the keys, right? And I love those colors, black and white. I really love black. But we want to create in sound as much variety as possible. So perhaps that's an analogy that will work for you, this imagining a sinuous kind of fiber connecting the notes so that it's not just point, 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 like individual notes. And I think part of the problem is that we have at our disposal so many other kinds of keyboards besides the piano. We have our computer, and those keyboards have changed a lot. I remember in high school I would type my essays for English class on my mom's typewriter, and she had just gotten an electric typewriter, and that was fun to use. We didn't have a computer in our house until I went away to university. My whole high school childhood was computerless. I remember my friend and I used to go stay after school, though, in grade 5, because the teacher had a Mac, a very early Apple computer, and it had Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, that game. I liked playing that. But we've got all these keyboards, whether it's a computer. My point mentioning the typewriter is that you had to push harder on those keys, especially the old typewriters. You really had to push, and then, it's a bit of a workout. And then gradually it's become easier to type. Laptops today, it's just tap, 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 hardly any finger movement is needed. Things are so easy, and all of the touch screens that we have when we are texting, we don't even push anything. It's just touch. My stove has got touch buttons. Everything is touch, touch, touch. Very few dials even, and we all are in this league of, unless you're living off the grid, out living a Thoreauvian lifestyle, you're using these devices. And that, I think, combined with having perhaps an electric keyboard without touch-sensitive keys. A lot of those electric pianos, they're just very easy to push the key down, and probably all they're meant for is just, to play a couple of triads while you turn on the little rhythm section and it sounds like a full band kind of thing. They're not designed for playing difficult keyboard music that was written for an acoustic instrument. Not that Bach was writing for the grand piano, it just hadn't been invented yet as we know it. But this is acoustic instrumental music. And so factor all of that in. So you do need to work a little bit, physically speaking, expending a bit of energy to get these different touches touch qualities of sound. So this when I'm outlining a wide interval, if I just use the back of this notepad here, I'm coming, instead of just going yum bum like that to get from point A to point B, I'm imagining that the sound is going below the keyboard to the left and then kind of swooshing like the Nike swoosh, you know, or like a check mark. Yum bum, in a very broad, like zoomed up macro view. That is what I'm doing. And I can only do so much of it when I'm playing. But my mind, even though I may only be moving just a little bit, in my mind and in my inner ear, I'm seeing like the note go down almost below the key bed and then curve up this way. That's partly why I do this at the piano with my left hand. I'm left-handed, so it's very awkward for me to do that with my right hand. In fact, I cannot do it. But my left hand, when you see it, you know, it's not conducting. It's trying to sort of coax the contour out of the notes that I'm hearing in my mind, to make it as curvaceous and gnarly as not gnarly, but like those vines on the tree, the clinging up the side of the building. And going slowly enough that you can try to enjoy the spaces between the notes, especially when these little bits, like here in measure 4, just play 2 notes slowly and then pause and take the sound in. Take it in, digest it, listen to it. And then the next note, boom, 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 boom. And where is it going? To there. You know, this kind of thing. Next bar, measure 5. When something is going up, in that case, it goes down right away. But these ones at measure 5, to me, that's joy. That F, that note there, la, is a joyful arrival. When we land on it, it's a joyful occasion. And then it goes down. And through that whole descent, all of that and this part, the destination is what note? It's the F, right? So knowing in your mind the destination, the points of arrival. This piece, as we said, is binary form. So 8 bars in the A section, marked by a double bar line there, repeats, and then 8 more bars in the B section. The B section is in F major. The piece started in D minor. What's nice about this piece is it's so clearly 4 bars plus 4 bars plus 4 bars plus 4 bars. That's a bit of a tongue twister. 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4. And so on a very sort of simple level, remember to breathe at the end of your 4th bars. So you could even take a very generous pause there to exaggerate that in your mind. And then something new. And then the next one. And the last one. Now, there are places along the way where I'm taking perhaps a little bit of a dash of time that's not after the 4 after a 4-bar group, like perhaps measure 9. And that's that beautiful spot I opened with in the intro. I want to talk about that next. But again, as we said with the longer the note value, the more kind of muscular sinew you imagine between the notes and the deeper the touch and tone. The shorter the note value, the less of that sinew and less depth into the key. The same could be said for breaths. There are bigger breaths, and then there are little catch breaths along the way too. Certainly the end of the A section is a significant point of arrival, and then finally the ultimate destination is the end of the piece. So the little places along the way where you might take a breath, snatch an extra moment to enjoy a little moment that you want to bring out, all very subtle. But it's all, it's not black and white. Like we have students who sometimes will see mezzo forte on the page, and regardless of whether it's by Prokofiev or by Scarlatti or whatever in between, mezzo forte is always the same, moderately loud, boom. But there's variety. There's different levels, right? It's like if you're feeling angry, well, there's a scale, right? You could feel just a little bit kind of ticked off, and then you can be like starting to get really irritated, and then you can be flat on angry, and then rage. It's a sliding scale. Everything, there's a sliding scale, so it's not just one or the other. And good piano playing is about increasing the levels within that sliding scale, so that your dynamics, are not just, between your level piano and your mezzo piano, it's not just one level in between, but how many levels in between can you come up with? Can you create 5 levels of variety of tone between piano and mezzo piano? The longer you play and the more critically you listen and the more devoted you are to the music, the more you love it, the more bothered you are by things going on in life and you want to make it better, but you don't know how other than through art. Try to refine and expand that sliding scale to an infinite number of levels. My teacher at the Eastman School of Music, Barry Snyder, he was like that, especially when it came to playing quietly. No one can play as quietly as him. Maybe Vladimir de Pachman. Actually, the YouTube, when it generates the captions, auto-generate captions, and it sometimes messes up and it thinks I'm saying Bach's music, B-O-X, when I'm saying J.S. Bach. It did that when I said Vladimir de Pachman, who was a wonderful pianist from long ago, and it said Vladimir de Pokemon. It's like picturing Pikachu in my head. But Mr. Snyder, my goodness, what he could do playing quietly, triple pianissimo, and also with his foot. And I remember him telling me, try to imagine that you are creating the pedal, maybe it goes down this far. If it's if it's in working order, it goes down, I don't know, an inch or so maybe. Try to imagine that you don't have just 3 or 4 levels of control within there that you use, but 100 levels. And I remember being shocked by that. Are you kidding me? 100 levels in an inch? And with my toe, I'm supposed to find level 45 and level 76, level 2, whatever. Yeah. And that's why it's so difficult. It's very difficult to have a career in music too on top of that. So, you really have to love this. But most of us, well, I'm trying to make a career for it, but I think most viewers are looking to not have piano playing be their profession, but as a skill that they can enjoy as a very special hobby that brings great fulfillment and beauty. And when you learn a piece, it's a journey. It takes a long time, sometimes many months, maybe a year or more if it's a big piece. And that having the patience to put in the work each day and to follow the steps and to see it grow. Or like a plant, you go to plant a tree, it doesn't grow in the first couple of days. It takes a long time. It takes time to learn pieces well. And so, these are just things to keep in mind. So we've talked about use of the body and fingering and tone quality, those stepwise motives. That one at measure 9. Followed by is just so incredibly beautiful. If I didn't extract just those bare notes, I wouldn't find the same level of beauty. So that is something I wanted to share. And you see I put 2 little red hearts and a happy face too at the bar line of those places between 9 and 10 and 11 and 12. Other things that are interesting, I circled in yellow in the right hand measure 3. Almost all the notes of that bar. C sharp, E, G, B flat. This is our little diminished 7th chord, which we get again in the right hand at measure 14, but in a different grouping of notes. Same chord, different grouping. So I thought that was interesting, that it's appearing in the A section and then again in the B section. In green, I've circled that passage with the hearts, which gets repeated in 10 and 11. It's the same rhythm, right? 1, 2, and 3, and 1, and 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1. Same rhythm here. 1, 2, and 3, and 1. So that is something that is worth noting. Then in purple, we've got this little scalar passage beginning on A in the left hand, measure 12. I love that, the way the right hand takes over with the exact same notes. So you want to have a nice handoff from left to right there. Overlapping of notes, I've talked about that in videos. Like this score, I should say, at the bottom, you notice it says most left-hand quarter notes may be played detached. I don't know who edits these books. I think that's a good indication. Actually, the RCM books are decent. Not for the professional player, but for the students, they're great. Sometimes the fingering I wonder about, but anyhow, they're great. And that detached note, I think, is good. So left-hand quarters. And the right-hand quarters, too, for that matter, I think can be semi-detached kind of style. Not staccato. I think this would be very ugly. Kind of poking at the bubble, and it's a little too prickly. But a little bit of space between those quarter notes is nice. But not so much space that we don't hear the end of the beat. And that's the problem too. When we try to detach this music from the Baroque period, we get the student can easily get a tendency to rush, because they're coming out of the key earlier to make a more clear, dry sound. And so we get something like, and like they've barely played the last note of the A section and already yum, ba, ba, ba. And this high note here, bop, it's, you know, it's not getting a chance to sing. So that's why I say in that early step that we did, the counting out loud, hearing the ands of the beats. Now this brings us to easily the most difficult passage of the piece, and that is measure 9 in the right hand, with this leap from a high A down to the F. It's a 10th. Now, if your level, unless you're an adult learning at this level, you may have large hands, and that may be just a walk in the park for you. And I envy you. I can't really reach a 10th. If I work at it really hard and it's in a slow passage, I can just barely. There it is. But if you're a little kid playing this piece, chances are your hands are small, and that is ferociously difficult. And so what do we get happening? We get an accent on the F, that note. Because in the student's best effort to get onto that, to make that jump quick enough so that they're not late for the beat, they're crashing on the note. So the finger substitutions can be handy for that. And so you can try that, see if it works. I would never play that without a finger substitution, but if you're a little kid, you know, just don't worry about it. But do try to rotate a little bit. The other thing with using finger substitution on that A in measure 9, 3 to 5, you got to do it, make it an instantaneous transfer or instantaneous substitution. 3 and then immediately to 5, and not just change the finger alone, but it's like the third finger on the A, it sort of slides forward towards the fallboard area, slides forward. Get comfortable sliding on the keys. This is important, especially in Bach, where we don't use as much pedal as in more romantic pieces. So you got the A with finger 3, slide forward, then you got room to snatch it with the finger 5, and instantly open that hand wide. Send that thumb down fast. Not play the piece fast, but make the movement fast to prepare. So that, because this note, this high A, is so beautiful. And the low F is not meant, I don't think, is not meant to be part of the melody. Because that's just, it's lumpy. The melody, I think, as I played in the intro, is followed by it's not that's just lumpy. It's like getting your syllables mixed up. You know, you go to say automobile, and instead you say automobile, or it's just, you know, it's out of place. It's awkward to go. So think of that low note that's hard to get to as just like whipped cream. It's not a melodic note. And here's where singing can come in handy. Sing that high A even as you play the low note. And try with the finger substitution, perhaps instantly opening the hand, sending the thumb down, and helping with the upper arm for that transportation. So the dynamic level on the page here says mezzo forte. That's been put in by the editor. Bach didn't put that in. But we don't need to be so literal with these things, right? It doesn't mean that every single note is the exact same mezzo forte. The A may be mezzo forte, whatever dynamic level you give that A. The F is less. and a touch of pedal, just a tiny whiff of pedal there should help with transportation there. Excuse me. This piece is in D minor, and I thought it might be interesting to indicate some other pieces. Bach wrote a lot in the key of D minor. This is a significant key, right? He wrote Art of Fugue, the last piece he wrote, the most monumental cycle of fugues ever written, perhaps the most enigmatic piece. The thing is massive and monumental. That is in D minor. Also, we've got a prelude and fugue in D minor in each book of the Well-Tempered Clavier. There's an invention and a sinfonia in D minor. We got the D minor concerto, which I jazzed up recently. Oh, I had fun with that. There's that little prelude and fugue in D minor, which I played. The French suite in the first French suite, Toccata number 4, and the 6th English suite. That's just the keyboard works. There's probably some other things in D minor for keyboard, certainly a lot of other instrumental stuff. But that's worth noting. If you're, little level 4 piece, Bach chose the key. So, interesting. Yeah. So I think that's pretty well. Oh, yes. And I wanted to also mention, too, and this is no surprise, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway, because I've done some videos before where I talk about chromatic saturation in Bach's music, the degree to which all 12 pitches of the chromatic scale are used or not in a piece. Right? 12 notes in the chromatic scale. And you can check those videos out if you like. I compared the inventions and sinfonias, and I want to do some more in a future video for some of the other pieces, the preludes and fugues, for instance. But I calculated for this little minuet, it only uses 8 out of 12 of the chromatic pitches. The notes it uses are D, E, F, G, A, B flat, B natural, C sharp. There's no D sharp, there's no F sharp, there's no G sharp, and there's no C natural. This is one of the most diatonic, or in other words, one of the most chromatically tame pieces that I've come across. Most of the pieces I'm playing are like 12 out of 12. Every note in the chromatic scale is used. When I did that video about the sinfonias and the inventions, I think 9 out of 12 was the fewest degree of chromatic saturation. I can't remember which piece it was, but this is only 8 out of 12 pitches are used. And 7 of those 8 pitches are the D minor scale. So we got to have those, right? So there's only one pitch, and that's B natural, which is used in this piece. One note that's not from the diatonic scale. And where does that B natural occur? Not in the A section. Of course, it occurs in the B section. Shoot, where is the measure where it happens? Measure 12, right? So we're nearly at the end of the piece. The B section is sort of the middle, that's where we change keys. And I think that's kind of the, climactic point of the piece. That's where we had those little heart moments. There's the B natural. And then again, of course, in the right hand, measure 13. But this really is not a chromatic piece at all, my goodness. So that is something you see in, there's a lot of little penciled-in horizontal arrows on the quarter notes, mostly, as well some half notes, occasionally an eighth note. These are places where, for me anyway, I feel that my hand, for whatever reason, wants to pull out of the key a little too soon. So those arrows are my way of marking visually for me as a reminder to give melodic value to those notes. 1, 2, and 3, and this part. 1, 2, and 3, and so hearing again the and of the beat. What else? We're nearly done. Ornaments. Let's talk about that. Now, if you're, as I say, a level 4 student, late beginner, early intermediate, don't worry about adding ornaments if you take the repeats, unless you want to. Ornaments are still, trills are still fairly new, at least in level 4 here in Canada. The student has likely done a few pieces with trills by this time. I know level 3 here, we start to see some in the sonatinas. But it's still a new thing. And playing trills, ornaments, mordents, whatever you want, whatever type they are, is difficult. And that's why we see none on the page here. But if you are a little bit more advanced in your level of play, do consider adding some ornaments. And these I've added in orange for you. And so you can see in orange over a few of those notes, like measure 1, measure 4, measure 6, measure 8, second ending, measure 9, 11, 14, and then the last bar. I've put in a little squiggly line. Sometimes if it's just a straight squiggle, like a trill, this kind of thing. There's a few of them, like the ones at the end of each section. It's a squiggle with a vertical line going through it. Those are mordents. It's nice to end a piece or end a section with a mordent, especially if there's a long note. And that's what I chose to do there. If I take it from measure 7. And I'm just playing F, E, F. Now the fingering for those ornaments, I've put also in orange above the trill symbol or the mordent symbol. I added a little upwards couple of notes there in measure 6. And actually I saw in another score that was marked in. So I felt good with myself for choosing that. I tried a few different things. I didn't want to clutter it up with trills. And, you can get too many of them, and it's just like you start to lose sight of the melodic quality. It gets too many buttons and bows kind of thing, at least for me. So I added there in the first bar over the D, starting on the note above. We wouldn't trill on the end of the beat, right? That would just be... it throws off the pulse. And because this is a minuet, we're in 3/4 time. 1, 2, 3, 1. You don't want your ornaments to clutter up the rhythmic flow or to distort the meter. You want them to complement the notes. So let me play this the second time through with my ornaments, and then I'll talk a little bit about how to practice some of these trills. So. So when you want to make a trill clean and tight and fit it into its allotted space, and these trills, by the way, I'm trilling them on the beat. 1 and 2 I'm starting the trill, that first one in measure 1, I'm starting it right on beat 3. I'm doing 2 rotations, right? E, D, E, D. You can see the fingering I'm using, 4, 1, 4, 1. When you're practicing trills, when you're playing trills, just in general with trills, it's best to approach them from above the key. If I don't come off the key to make that trill, it's harder to get them nice and clean. They'll sound a little bit like this. I did a video about that. Call it the. It sounds like they're coughing. Excuse me, I actually am coughing. But they sound bumpy and lumpy. You want to push off on the first note of the trill. And not the second note, not. You want on the front note, the first note. And I'm gesturing again with my left hand. I can't help it, but maybe it's actually helpful for you as a visual. So stress release, stress release. If I carry on. So that here we're trilling 2 rotations, G, F, G, F, in slow. And we're pushing off on the first note, on the G, right on the beat. In this case, it's the downbeat. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Try to, when they get longer than, this is 2 rotations. You may have 4 rotations, sometimes 6 rotations. When it gets that many, I can't count them. I had a teacher who could count them all as he heard them. There was 8 rotations there, he'd say, and I was, really, you can hear that? Wow. This is just 2 rotations, but do fit them into your pulse. And again, counting out loud, 1, and just take the trill itself. This is the 1 measure 4. Counting out loud, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, and not 1, 2. Because if you don't push off on the front of the trill on the first note, but instead on the second note, that it sounds lumpy, but it also distorts the meter. Excuse me. So all of those trills, I'm doing this the same way. Approach from above. And again, use your ear. Listen critically. If your trill, even if you are pushing off on the first note, but you're getting... Like I'm pushing off on the first note. Yes, I'm coming from above, but it's still sounding like a bunch of lumpy potatoes. Oh, that's not pretty. Then slow it down. Slow it. It's like with speech. Sometimes I'm talking too fast, I have no idea what I'm saying because I'm just talking so incredibly fast. It's like just slow it down a little bit. Or like when you're learning a new language, if you dump a person in the middle of a shopping mall or a restaurant in a foreign country and hear this language, how can you possibly, if you've studied a little bit, how can you, maybe you pick out a word here or there. But if the people are talking very slowly, like I used to take these how to learn Ukrainian books, because my mom's side is Ukrainian. I have some connection to that side of the family. I feel a bit of a connection there for sure. And I always liked the sound of that language and had books and would sign out some cassette tapes from the library. And, the first lessons they would talk so slow. Добрый день, whatever, so slowly, right? Or if you're learning French, bonjour, je m'appelle Penny. They're going slow. It's like with music too. Go slowly until you can hear it and recreate the sound clearly. 10 times in a row, 10 days a week, 10 days in a row, and then pick it up. Don't expect to have, fleetingly fast, clean trills after a couple days' work. It takes years. So go slowly. You could even start with a two-note, as though it were a two-note slur. So just, in other words, take one rotation. So this one in measure 4, just GF. Don't worry about the other GF. And feel that the stress is on the G, like and the release is on the F. So push, release, and listen for an actual difference in the quality of sound. So the G has more fullness of sound and the F has less. So that they're not both the same. No, that's not musical, but sorry. And the flexibility of the wrist really helps with that. You can try, even with your left hand, just hold your wrist up in the air like that. You can even take it up an octave. That might make it easier so you don't have your arm in the middle of your body, just for the sake of being able to create an expressive two-note slur. Drop down from above on that G. So the wrist is in the air. The hand is floppy and loose, as though you're wiggling your hands to air dry them. Maybe they're wet and you're just drying them. And you go down with your arm weight behind that note. Let your wrist sink a little below the key. And then on the F, which we want to have less sound on, you lift your wrist up, so that engaging the wrist joint so that it's flexible. Sometimes you say to a student, lift your wrist, and they lift from the elbow, or this kind of thing. No, getting the wrist very flexible is essential for, not just for good tone, but for creating light, effervescent, sparkling trills, right? So, and by holding your right wrist with your left hand like this, you can sort of help it along. You may have my wrists are quite flexible because I work a lot on it and have been for many years. You may not have flexible wrists, and so by holding it in the other hand, you can kind of coax it along and help it. So watch my wrist, not my finger. It's actually very difficult to do, so that's why you gotta go slowly. But if you do enough of that, then you get the sound in your ear and the basic feel, and then you can pick it up. You can. It's good to practice trills in groups of 3, or sextuplets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then go back to just the 4 notes, the 2 rotations. And then a little faster. So now I'm using I'm using 3-2 because that's the fingering most students use. Actually, for this passage, I'm using 4-1 for this trill. That just feels better for me. I don't trill so well with 3-2. It's funny that I chose that. I'm trying to accommodate the vast variety of people's backgrounds watching this, which is hard to do. Much easier in a one-on-one lesson for sure. But that's just a little peek into how I practice trills. Pedal is another thing. I think that is, other than pedaling, that is everything I wanted to share with you. So I do want to show you the pedaling though, so I'm going to include that here at the end, and you'll get a view of my of my foot with my bumblebee socks on. You know, B for Mr. B, right? So let's take a peek at the pedaling. You only need just a tiny touch of it. In fact, better to practice the piece without pedal, honestly. But if you want a touch here and there, will not do any harm. So I'll show you that, and then we'll connect again. And so that completes everything I have for you in this tutorial devoted to the Minuet in D minor, attributed to Bach from the notebook for Anna Magdalena Bach, 1725. I hope it was helpful. Do feel free to share any questions or comments down below in the comment section. I always love to hear from folks, and I promise I will reply. But got to wrap this up. So I will say farewell for now. Happy practicing to you. Stay well, stay safe, and we'll see you again soon for more performances of Bach's music and practice tips. Take care. Bye-bye.